Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to talk about holidays. So we just got through Halloween and Thanksgiving is coming up, Christmas is coming up, and then New Year's and any other holiday that you can think of. It's a big time of year for everyone, and it's a very busy time of year. And that usually means a lot of stress for some people. And, we all get it. I think it's pretty normal. And so we want to talk about how to make it maybe a little less stressful and more enjoyable. And so the word that you're going to hear the most is Mark's absolute favorite word.
Boundaries.
Yes.
Boundaries. Yeah. I think people might think, well, why are you talking about holidays so soon? And I may have mentioned this before, but in our line of work, so, helping people, Halloween, which, just happened a couple of days ago, this starts the holiday season. That sounds crazy. But, if you go to, like Costco, they have their Christmas stuff up. I bought my grandkids' Advent calendars already. I give them the Advent calendar with a little piece of chocolate. So yeah, holiday time is in full swing. So this isn't too early to start thinking about this. The other thing that I think our listeners will hear a lot along with boundaries is planning and dialogue. I think that a mistake that a lot of people make is they don't talk about it until they get into it, and so, they're going through the holidays and Thanksgiving and mid-December and they're stressed out and then they blow up. When I think a lot of what we'll suggest today, in different contexts is talk about it first.
Yeah.
And then come up with a plan. So go in, maybe we can give them their takeaway already. It's, go into the holidays with a plan on how you're going to do it. And it'll be less stressful just because you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in retail, and I'm telling you now, Santa Claus exploded in our store like a month ago. Like the first week
of October. Is that fun though for you to be in the middle of Christmas, or is it?
I think it would be fun if our store weren't so small and our trucks weren't so big. So we get like these ginormous trucks every week, and it is so stressful to try to find room for all of the stuff that we get. I mean, it's unreal, the miracles that we pull off sometimes in finding space for stuff. So I love the holidays. I genuinely enjoy them. And so you put out a brief article about, and this comes from your office, it's labeled Aspen Grove Counseling, and it's labeled Managing the Holidays. And I'm going to get this linked in our show notes because I think it's a really good article to read. And it kind of starts off with identifying some of the stresses and some of the problems that are created around the holidays. So one of the things that it says, take time to identify which of the following issues causes distress for you at this time of year. And some of them, it's like you're just fed up with all of it, or the constant expectations and financial burdens. And one of them that you said that I really related to in this article that you talked about is this feeling of let down when it's over, because there's so much buildup. I relate to that a lot because it's so exciting and there's all this buildup to Christmas. And I remember as a kid that not sleeping at all on Christmas Eve. You don't get any sleep because you're so excited for the next day to open all the presents. And I was so worried about losing that excitement as I got older. And now that I have kids, I've found that I still have that excitement. And I love that. I love that I'm still excited for Christmas because I love getting to spend it with my kids and creating our own traditions. And it's so much fun. But when it's over, I'm like, well, now what?
Yeah, I can see that. I think a lot of it, I was thinking about that maybe it has to do with the decorations. I mean, if you think about for people who decorate, and a lot of people don't for holidays, no matter what holiday you might celebrate, but your house changes. And for a lot of people, it's warmer, it's more welcoming. things
Okay.
like that. Like even people who you don't necessarily have to celebrate Christmas to put wreaths on the door, or
Mm-hmm.
which is a sign of welcome. Like at our office, we certainly don't put up a Christmas tree because that's
Right.
too indicative of Christianity. But we put lights on the tree. We have fake trees in our
Mm-hmm.
waiting room, so we put
Okay.
lights on our fake trees, and then on our lights out front, we put wreaths because
Mm-hmm.
that's just kind of a welcoming sign of the season. I used to put poinsettias out, but that's too much trouble. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just you change the way it looks and it often feels warmer. And I think a lot of that, you mentioned childhood. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of what we bring as adults into this season is our memories of what it was like, as a child, which can go both ways. See, one of the other things that mentioned in this article that you're referencing is often if there's childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
it can often occur around the holidays. And the reason for that is statistically, say if you're going to be abused, it's statistically it's more likely it's going to be a male relative.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're often around male relatives more often during the holidays. And so for some people, this can be a really difficult time of year because it's triggering, because it's the time when something bad happened to them. So it's important for our listeners to remember you can go either way with this. You can have wonderful memories like you have and I had as a child. And then for some, it's a very, very difficult season. But I think that the important thing, starting out to what is it that you either dread about the holidays or that you love about the holidays? And I think you need to be able to verbalize it and talk about it with someone
Mm-hmm.
out there.
Yeah, and come up with a plan.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things, especially for parents of young kids, it's so important to establish early on and probably like now or maybe even like yesterday is your budget for the
Right.
holidays. How much are we going to spend? What do we want to do for gifts? Do we want to start shopping now? Have we already started shopping? What have we spent? What do we still want to spend? What are we going to spend outside of just gifts? Who are we getting gifts for and how much we want to spend per person? These are all things that you should be talking about now. And again, just have an idea and come up with a plan, something that you can both agree on together. And then create a budget for it too. I think that's also going to be really helpful is create a budget or at the very least just keep track of what you're spending where. I know for me and Curtis, that's kind of crucial for our relationship well-being is budgeting or really just tracking our spending. That's crucial for us in getting along.
Yeah, and that, I think that I do see couples often where the major stress is the money. And
Mhm.
so you have to think about what are your goals for the holidays? What is
Yeah.
important to you? Is it buying gifts? Is it the materialism? And for some people, it might be. But for a lot of people, it's not about that.
Yeah.
And so I think if you plan ahead, you can figure out what can you do that has more meaning than,
Mhm.
say, just giving these material gifts. Because for some people, that doesn't feel good. And so again, it can go either way. I think that's what I'm realizing as you and I are talking about it right now, is there are certainly positives and negatives that people can take from the holiday season, because there's certainly a lot of people who hate the whole materialistic side of this time of year. And
Mhm.
I really get that.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out what has meaning for you, what has meaning for your children, if you have children, and for your relatives. So I agree with you. Now is the time that you start planning and talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, talking about it now and again, just coming up with a plan. Another thing that I related to that you mentioned either in our outline or in that article you sent me is eating too many sweets.
Oh,
I also fall into that category. And so that kind of goes into, I guess, self-care,
yeah,
which is another important thing for the holidays is self-care. And the holidays, they're so fast. Like it's very fast paced and it feels like go, go, go. And there's so much to do. Like there's so many things that you can do. And so I think it's important to remember and recognize you can't do everything. You don't have to do everything and you need to plan downtime. Don't
right.
feel like you have to do it all.
So here's the first thing I said. You can repeat after me, Liz.
Mhm.
No. No. I think we have to learn how to say no.
Yeah.
And and again, I hear this all the time with couples, is they're stressed, there's so too many things, but so many people believe that they can't say no, either
Yeah.
to families or friends. And if you have a lot of friends and family, you've got to party, 2 days out of every weekend. And
Yep.
it's just too much. And so again, you decide what you want in your family. If it's the two of you, if it's the two of you plus, children, or it could be just the one of you. So it
Mhm.
doesn't matter how you define family. If you're a single person, I think the same thing applies, is that you can get worn out. And
Yeah.
so being able to say no, or even planning ahead. So this goes back to planning. How many parties do you want to attend? How many functions make sense? If you have children, I think it's important to think about, what are their bedtimes going to be? How
Yep.
tired are these kids going to get? Or how tired are the adults going to get as well? Because
Mhm.
once you get tired, then your stress level goes up, and your ability to handle the stress goes way down. And so you increase the likelihood that you're going to snap or have a fight or something like that. And so I think you have to be really mindful of what's going to work for your family, however you define it,
Yep.
and decide, I will attend this number of parties, or I will see these people. Because most people have more invitations, or more what you might call obligations, than they really want, then you have to be choosy and say, I'll do this and this and this and not that. And this is where the boundaries come in, because
Mhm.
you're going to get, most likely, you'll get pushback from either friends or family. Oh, please, can't you come and do this? We'll miss you. We really want you to come. And
Yep.
you have to be able to resist that, because the season will have more meaning for you and more enjoyment if you have some boundaries. So food, you mentioned food, too many sweets.
Yep.
It's part of the holiday season, but
Mhm.
in the end, it probably disrupts your sleep in some ways. It probably disrupts your just the general feeling of well-being. I
Yeah.
think that here's some other things that you need to focus on. A lot of people, they're too busy, and they give up their exercise, they
Mhm.
give up their downtime, they give up their eating right, and all of those coupled together, lead to increase in stress and not as much enjoyment. So I think that you decide, say you're a couple, you need to spend time as a couple, because I
Yes.
see this all the time, that, oh, we're just focused on the kids, or we're focused on extended family, and the couple itself gets lost.
Mhm.
And I think that's a real mistake, because you talked about traditions. And I think that, no matter what you celebrate this time of year, it's really about traditions and creating traditions. And so, I think people with children create their own little traditions. That's really one of the joys of, I think, being parents, is to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that Curtis and I I mean, we loved creating fun traditions with our kids. And our first few Christmases, we were poor college students, and then our oldest was very young. And, my dad, Christmas is important to my dad, and so he wanted to make sure she had a good Christmas. And so, he kind of helped out with that, right? As far as the financial aspect. And then I still remember our very first Christmas, just the three of us. And it was fun and it was magical and it was still exciting and it was so nice just to be able to have, just our little family, our individual family unit. And we still make, our parents a part of the holidays, but Christmas morning, that intimacy of just your family and the fun of it, don't lose sight of that. Right. And don't forget about that, about what is most important is your family.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be true for most of our listeners. If you look back on your life, let's just pick an age. You're 15 years old at home. Do you remember any of the gifts you got at 15?
Nope.
But I would bet you remember any traditions that your family did
Oh,
around
yeah.
the holidays at that
Oh,
time.
yeah.
So you
Yeah.
see, if you want to create the memories, it's not about the material gifts. And
Mhm.
that's what a lot of people mistake. It's really about they make that mistake of focusing too much on the gifts and not enough on the tradition. Like we go see lights every year and get donuts and hot chocolate or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a tradition. And so your kids grow up and they remember we did this. Nobody's going to remember the gift you got when you're 10 years old. It's just
No.
not going to happen. But you will remember what was Christmas Eve like, or what was, how did you spend Hanukkah? What were the 8 days of Hanukkah like for you? What did your family do around? Like, did you light the candles every night? Things like that. And so you create the traditions.
Mm-hmm.
That's what your kids are going to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So self-care, going back before we leave self-care, a lot of us are introverts like me. I'm raising my hand right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that for those of us who are introverts, we need to schedule some downtime, which means alone time,
Yeah.
because it can be really overwhelming to not have a lot of alone time. One of my son-in-laws is an introvert, and I've just gotten used to this, and I actually appreciate that at times he'll be at our house and he'll disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he's just going off to get his needed downtime. And so what I like about that is he's got a pretty good sense of self-care going
Mm-hmm.
on. And so I think you need to take care of yourself. And there's so much a feeling of obligation that we have
Yes.
this time of year. And that typically doesn't feel good to people because they feel like they don't have choice. They're worn out. They're tired. They've spent too much money. They're away from home, but I'm obligated. I have to. I hear this all the time. I have to do this. That's not true. You always have a choice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We make time for what's important.
I'm not saying that doing these things like family isn't important. I think
Yes.
it is. It's
Yes.
just we all have limits
Oh,
to
yeah.
how much
We
we can do.
So you just have to decide ahead of
Yeah.
time what is most important to you, right? I guess it kind of goes back to like that good, better, best. There are good
Uh-huh.
things to do, but there are better things to do. But what's the best thing for you and for your family? And I think you need to decide early on what you want your priorities to be. And you need to talk about the fact, okay, how are we going to schedule downtime? How are we going to, schedule time for just us? What is this going to look like? What's our plan in advance? You just need to talk about it. And, I think it's really important to think about your partner's needs. So,
Yeah.
for example, I'm an extrovert. Curtis is an introvert. And so I think it is so important to be cognizant of each other's needs and the fact that Curtis is more likely to get burned out on parties way before I will. But Curtis also recognizes that I need to go to parties. I need to get that social interaction and that social function. So that's something you definitely need to talk about is, what is too much for you and what is not enough for you in
Right.
those instances.
It's all about planning and talking about it. What each of your needs are. What do you want out of this season? So some of the other things that I think are important to mention is that we go into this time of year, and I think we have expectations about how we're going to feel. Others around us also have expectations how they think we should feel, like it should all be happy and
Mm-hmm.
gay and
Merry and bright.
merry and bright. So remember that this handout points out that about 2 to 10% of the population suffer from what we call seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, which
Mm-hmm.
is so depending on where you live, and so for most of the United States anyway, you start to get less sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you start to get less sunlight, that really affects a lot of people in a negative way and increases some depression and sadness. And so for a lot of people, it's a hard time of year because it's that time when we have decreased sunlight, it's colder, we don't get outside as much.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have these competing, I'm feeling down, I should be happy. So it's not just around expectations about how much money you spend or how many parties you're going to go to. It's expectations about how we feel internally. I think
Mm.
there are a lot of expectations put on us. And like you said, we need to be aware of those around us and that some people are suffering from seasonal affective disorder and they're not going to present in the same way that a lot of other people will, happy, gay, bright, and merry the
Mm-hmm.
way a lot of people do anyway during this time of year.
And I like what you said about how people, it's an expectation. People expect you just to be happy because it's the
Right.
holidays. Well,
Yeah.
if you're not, acknowledge it. This is an idea
Mhm.
that we've definitely talked about before, that all emotions are valid and you need to acknowledge your emotions. If you get to a point where you're like, I am not happy, I am not having fun, and I am not enjoying this holiday right now, that's okay. Like, it's fine. Acknowledge that. Don't try to put on a happy face for those around you. Just be honest and say, I just need some alone time right now because I'm not having a good time. I'm not enjoying myself. And, validate yourself. I
Mhm.
think that's going
Yeah.
to go a long way towards helping achieve happiness.
Right. And, I mentioned a few minutes ago the idea that sometimes traumatic things happen to children during the holidays. But I think another thing to be aware of is that it could represent a time of loss for some people,
Yes.
loss of loved ones. And, if spouse or a parent or a sibling maybe died during the time, during December, then that can be hard. Another thing that I've seen in adults is I've seen a couple of families where their parents, they were children, their parents divorced around
Mm,
holidays. And that forever changed the way they think about holidays. It became more of a traumatic experience and one that they didn't look forward to just because of something that happened with their parents during their childhood. So I think to be aware of those around us that we all are not going to experience the holidays in the same way or look
mm-hmm.
forward to them in the same way. And for some of us, you get to January 2nd and you're
Yep.
done with New Year's and it's a relief. So,
Mm-hmm.
again, you mentioned earlier, it might be a letdown. For some people, it's going to be this big sigh of relief. Okay, it's all over until, next November when we start again.
Yeah.
So be aware that there's not one way to approach the holidays, that you really have to listen to yourself and figure out what has meaning to you, what do you want out of it, and then be aware of those around you and your family. It takes planning and dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I like what you said. There's no one single right way to enjoy the holiday season, right? Not everyone celebrates Christmas and Hanukkah the same. And, not everyone's going to enjoy it the same. And it's okay if it's not fun for you. And one thing I do also want to point out is oftentimes after a loss, the first year is the hardest. So that
It's
first
really hard, yeah.
it's the first holiday season without that loved one
Mhm.
that is often the most difficult for people. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that we maybe wouldn't typically talk about, but I think is good to do. So that's different religions around the holidays and different traditions and celebrations, and kind of how you can maybe approach that, particularly if you gain a family member who celebrates it differently than you do. So I'm thinking your family grew up celebrating Christmas, but then, you have a child who marries someone of a different religion and maybe they celebrate Hanukkah. And so, and kind of what that looks like, because that could certainly be difficult to navigate the first couple of years. And so, really, what it comes down to is I think the biggest thing is just going to be empathy and trying to understand and really just being open and honest. These are my beliefs, and this is why I celebrate the way I do. And I think that's going to go for both ways.
Yeah, and I agree that you have to be honest and open and have empathy for the other person. So I have that situation in my family. My daughter, Adrian, married a young man who's Jewish. And so kids love it because they celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas. And
Okay.
that's actually been my experience with other people. I had a colleague once who was the same thing. She was Jewish and her husband grew up Christian, and their kids then on one side of the family they would celebrate Hanukkah, which is 8 days of some gift giving, and then
Mm-hmm.
they also got to celebrate Christmas. So I think in a lot of cases it's actually easier than you might think
Okay.
because they're offset a little bit. Hanukkah is one that shifts slightly the days of Hanukkah, but I don't know that it ever overlaps Christmas ever. It's often early on in December, and so you really get the opportunity to celebrate both.
Yeah.
I've not seen it be an issue in those types of families.
Okay, which is good. And I think I think what it can come down to, at least for me as a kid, is I think it's differences that tend to make us nervous or things that we don't understand. And so, I remember as a kid, it made me a little bit nervous or uncomfortable to hear about people celebrating a different religion, or they didn't
Hmm.
celebrate Christmas. And that's different, and we don't like different, particularly as a kid. And so it's important to talk about that and to talk about, hey, some people celebrate Christmas in a completely different way in different parts of the world. Some people don't celebrate it at all. And I think really it's great to expose kids to different cultures, right? I mean, I think that those can be really positive and good memories for kids.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I feel really fortunate in that my grandkids go to the Jewish community school,
Mhm.
and so they have that Shabbat every Friday that
Mhm.
they celebrate in some way. I agree with you. It's important to introduce different cultures. The other thing I was going to mention is that often it can be difficult because, so for instance, in my case, I was raised a Christian,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't consider myself at all a Christian now. I'm an atheist. And so, some people might say, well, how do you celebrate Christmas? I think that a lot of Christmas, it can be a secular holiday as well.
Mhm.
For a lot of people, it is more secular than it is sacred. And so I think that, again, being open to different ways of celebrating a holiday is important.
Yeah.
And there's not just one way to do it.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think whether it's sacred or secular, I think the main theme around it is still family, right?
See, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about what this is about is relationships.
Yeah.
If you
Mhm.
think about the gathering,
Yeah.
and again, going back to do you focus on the gifts or do you focus on the relationships, which is again is the tradition and it is the importance of gathering with friends and family. I hope our listeners didn't get the idea that I was thinking don't go to parties. I just
Right.
you need to be judicious in how many parties you choose to go to. But it's we get our happiness and our contentment a lot from relationships with other people.
Mhm.
And the holidays, no matter what you celebrate, I think this what I like about this time of year is it's the relationships.
Yeah.
And if I look at the contact with my kids and my grandkids, it's always increased this time of year, and I love that because they'll be off school for like 2 weeks probably.
Mhm.
So I see a lot of them. I always take off the last week of the year. I don't work at all. And so from, a little before Christmas to past New Year's, I'm home, we're doing stuff with kids and family. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And so what really has meaning is the connection with family and friends, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I said in the beginning, don't lose sight of that. No matter how you separate it or no matter how you celebrate it, decide what's important to you. And yeah, I mean, I'm with you right there. My favorite part of this holiday is it's the family time, the family togetherness. And how incredibly disappointing would it be if I didn't get to spend it with my kids?
Yeah.
And so don't forget that. So, make sure your kids are a part of it, or how incredibly depressed. Like if I couldn't see Curtis and couldn't celebrate Christmas with Curtis, I mean, that would ruin the entire holiday for me if I didn't get to be with my family. Don't forget that. So, I mean, because work is going to pull you in a million different directions. I mean,
Right.
I asked myself a few weeks ago, what was I thinking picking up a job in retail this time of year? Right.
Yeah, you weren't thinking very clearly there, Liz.
Right? And so I know for us, it's going to be a really crazy and busy 2 months.
Mhm.
But, I also recognize and will prioritize my family. So I guess that's probably the biggest takeaway from this is family. Family is the number one most important thing, and just don't lose
Yeah.
sight of that.
Yeah, I feel really lucky because one of the traditions that has started since Adrian and Jake moved back from San Francisco. So I have all four grandchildren, and my house is large enough that we can accommodate everybody. So they sleep over on Christmas Eve,
Oh, that's
and
fun.
ever since I've been here. So I have all my grandkids and all the kids who are at least in town, and that's a great tradition. I mean, that's what I love about the holidays is just being with family.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Same here. Okay, so next week we are going to completely change gears. We are going to talk about autism. It's going to be a really great topic. It's not something we've delved into before, but I think it's going to kind of come back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago when it came to disabilities. So we're going to really specifically delve into autism.
I think it's misunderstood.
Yes.
And so we're going to try and get some clarity around what it is. I also think it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot.
Hmm.
Oh, that person is autistic. And so I think it's important to realize what it is and how you can, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, how you can interact well with people who perhaps may be on the spectrum, the autistic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a good one. All right, guys, we will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.